The day failure changed everything. There was a time when Frank Bettger believed his life was heading in the wrong direction. Every day felt like another confirmation of the same painful idea, that maybe he simply wasn't good enough, not talented enough, not confident enough, not destined for success. Before becoming one of the most respected sales professionals of his time, Frank Bettger was something very different. He was a man struggling with failure, repeated failure. In fact, his career began with a crushing disappointment. At the time, Bettger was trying to succeed as a professional baseball player. Like many young men with big dreams, he believed that passion alone would carry him forward, but reality had other plans. He was eventually dropped from the team, not because he lacked ability, but because he lacked something else: energy, drive, visible enthusiasm. His managers believed he simply didn't have the spark required to succeed, and that moment could have easily defined the rest of his life. Many people, when faced with rejection like that, quietly accept defeat. They tell themselves a dangerous story. Maybe success just isn't for me. But Bettger did something different. Instead of accepting failure as a final verdict, he began asking a powerful question. What if the problem isn't my ability, but my attitude? That question would eventually transform his entire life, and what he discovered would go on to inspire millions of people around the world. Because Bettger realized something incredibly important. Success is rarely determined by talent alone. In fact, many talented people fail, and many average people succeed beyond imagination. The difference often comes down to something much simpler: energy, enthusiasm, and the willingness to act with confidence even before you feel confident. From that moment forward, Bettger made a simple decision. He would start acting enthusiastic, even when he didn't feel like it. He would bring energy into every conversation, every meeting, every opportunity. And something incredible happened. People began responding differently. Doors began opening. Opportunities started appearing when none existed before. And slowly, failure began transforming into success. But the lesson Bettger discovered goes far beyond selling. It applies to business, to relationships, to personal growth, and even to the way we think about our own potential. Because the truth is, many people today are living far below what they are capable of achieving. Not because they lack intelligence, not because they lack talent, but because they have unknowingly trained their minds to expect less from themselves. The good news? Your mindset can be changed, your habits can be rebuilt, and your level of success can rise far beyond what you once believed possible. In the next part of this audiobook, we will explore the powerful principle that completely transformed Frank Bettger's career. A principle so simple, yet so powerful, that it can instantly change the way people see you and the opportunities that come into your life.
The energy principle that changed everything. After the painful experience of being rejected from professional baseball, Frank Bettger found himself standing at a crossroads. He could accept the label that had been placed on him, or he could begin searching for a different explanation. Why had he really failed? Was it truly a lack of talent, or was there something deeper happening beneath the surface? For many days, this question stayed in his mind, until one simple observation began to change everything. Bettger started paying attention to the people who were succeeding around him, not just in sports, but in business, in conversations, in leadership. And he noticed something interesting. Many of the most successful individuals were not necessarily the most talented. They were not always the smartest. They were not even the most experienced. But they all shared one powerful characteristic: energy. Real, visible, contagious energy. They spoke with enthusiasm. They moved with purpose. They approached people with genuine interest. And when they walked into a room, you could feel their presence. This realization struck Bettger with incredible force, because suddenly he understood something that many people miss their entire lives. People respond more strongly to energy than they do to ability. Think about it. Imagine two people presenting the same idea. The first person speaks slowly, quietly, without much excitement. Even if the idea is brilliant, people may not feel inspired. Now imagine the second person presenting that exact same idea, but this time with enthusiasm, with confidence, with genuine excitement about what they are saying. Suddenly the room feels different. The idea feels more powerful, more believable, more important. Nothing about the idea changed, only the energy behind it. This simple truth became the turning point of Bettger's life. He made a bold decision. From that moment forward, he would act with enthusiasm, even if he didn't feel enthusiastic at first. And this might sound strange, but psychology tells us something fascinating. Emotion often follows action, not the other way around. Most people believe they must feel motivated before they act, but in reality, action is often what creates motivation. When Bettger began forcing himself to act with enthusiasm, something remarkable happened. At first, it felt unnatural, almost like pretending. But slowly, his behavior began influencing his emotions, and his emotions began influencing the way people responded to him. Customers listened more carefully. Conversations became more engaging. Opportunities appeared where rejection once lived. And what started as a simple experiment became a powerful life strategy. But there is an even deeper lesson hidden inside this story, because enthusiasm does something extraordinary inside the human brain. When we act with energy and excitement, our brain begins releasing chemicals associated with motivation and focus: dopamine, adrenaline, and other powerful neurochemicals that increase attention and drive. In other words, when you act enthusiastic, your brain begins helping you become enthusiastic. This is why some of the most successful people in the world seem almost unstoppable. They have trained themselves to generate energy even during difficult moments, and that energy becomes a magnet. It attracts people, it attracts opportunities, and most importantly, it attracts belief in the possibility of success. Frank Bettger would later say that this single principle transformed his career more than any technical skill. Not sales techniques, not persuasive language, but enthusiasm, real enthusiasm, the kind that makes people feel something when they interact with you. And this principle applies far beyond selling. It applies to leadership, to entrepreneurship, to relationships, even to personal development, because the way you show up in the world shapes how the world responds to you. If you approach life with hesitation, life often responds with hesitation. But if you approach life with energy and conviction, people begin paying attention, doors begin opening, and possibilities begin expanding. But Bettger's transformation was only beginning, because enthusiasm alone was not enough. He soon realized that confidence had to be built through action, through experience, through stepping into situations that once felt uncomfortable. And in the next part of this audiobook, we will explore the powerful connection between action and confidence, a principle that explains why some people remain stuck in self-doubt, while others slowly build the unstoppable confidence that leads to extraordinary success. And once you understand this principle, you may begin seeing your own fears in a completely different way, not as obstacles, but as signals pointing directly toward your next level of growth.
Confidence is not born, it is built. There is a common myth that quietly limits millions of people, a myth that sounds harmless on the surface. but in reality, it destroys potential before it even begins. The myth is this: some people are simply born confident, and others are not. If you believe this idea, confidence becomes something mysterious, something reserved for a lucky few, something that appears naturally in certain personalities but never in others. But when Frank Bettger began carefully observing successful people, he discovered something very different. Confidence was not something they were born with, it was something they built. Slowly, repeatedly, through action. Not perfect action, not fearless action, just action. This discovery changed the way Bettger approached his entire career, because earlier in his life, he believed confidence had to come first. He believed that before he could succeed, he had to feel ready. But waiting to feel ready can become a lifelong trap. Think about how many opportunities people avoid because they don't feel confident yet. They hesitate to start a business. They hesitate to speak in public. They hesitate to apply for better positions. They hesitate to pursue ambitious goals. And they tell themselves a comforting story. I'll do it when I feel more confident. But here is the hidden truth. Confidence rarely appears before action. Confidence is the result of action. Every skill you admire in other people was once uncomfortable for them. Every expert was once a beginner. Every confident speaker once felt nervous. Every successful entrepreneur once doubted their own abilities. What separates them from everyone else is not the absence of fear, it is their relationship with it. They act anyway. Frank Bettger experienced this lesson firsthand when he entered the world of sales. At the beginning, the work felt intimidating. Walking into unfamiliar offices, speaking to strangers, presenting ideas, facing rejection. These situations triggered the same fear many people feel when stepping outside their comfort zone. But Bettger decided something important. Instead of avoiding these uncomfortable situations, he would deliberately move toward them. Every conversation became practice. Every rejection became feedback. Every small success became proof that improvement was possible. And slowly, something began changing inside him. His confidence was growing, not because he suddenly believed he was perfect, but because he was gaining experience. Experience removes uncertainty, and uncertainty is often what creates fear. Imagine learning to ride a bicycle. At first, the idea seems unstable. Your mind imagines falling. Your body feels tense. But after practicing enough times, the fear disappears. Not because someone told you to believe in yourself, but because your brain now has evidence that you can do it. This is exactly how confidence develops in every area of life, through repetition, through exposure, through experience. Bettger also discovered another powerful principle during this process. Action does more than build confidence. It also builds clarity. Many people spend months or even years trying to plan the perfect strategy for success. They analyze every detail. They wait for perfect conditions. They search for certainty. But life rarely offers certainty in advance. Clarity often comes after movement, not before it. When Bettger began actively engaging with people, he started learning things that no book could teach him. He learned how people actually think, what questions they ask, what concerns they have, what motivates them to make decisions, and with every interaction, his understanding deepened. What once felt intimidating began feeling natural, and this transformation was not the result of talent, it was the result of exposure. Exposure is one of the most powerful forces in human development. The brain adapts quickly to repeated experiences. Situations that once felt overwhelming gradually become familiar, and what is familiar rarely feels frightening. This is why people who regularly challenge themselves seem increasingly confident over time.
Their brain simply becomes comfortable with situations that others avoid. Frank Bettger later reflected on this stage of his life with an important realization. Most people dramatically underestimate how quickly they can grow when they take consistent action. Progress rarely happens overnight, but it also does not take decades. Small improvements accumulate faster than most people expect. One conversation leads to another. One skill improves the next. One opportunity reveals another. And eventually, the person who once doubted themselves begins achieving results they once thought impossible. But Bettger also understood something else. Action alone is not enough. Action must be guided by awareness. You must observe what works. You must refine your approach. You must remain curious. Because success is rarely a straight line. It's an evolving process of learning, adjusting, and improving. And those who embrace this process eventually discover something extraordinary. Fear loses its power, not because it disappears completely, but because it becomes familiar. It becomes manageable. And once fear loses its control over your decisions, your possibilities expand dramatically. You begin attempting things you once avoided. You begin exploring opportunities you once ignored. You begin building the kind of life that once felt distant. And it all begins with a simple shift in perspective. Confidence is not a prerequisite for action. Confidence is a product of action. Frank Bettger's journey from failure to success did not begin with extraordinary talent. It began with a decision to move forward even while feeling uncertain. And that decision gradually unlocked abilities he never knew he possessed. But Bettger's transformation did not stop there. As his experience grew, he began noticing another critical pattern. The most successful individuals were not just confident, they were also deeply disciplined. They followed routines, they structured their time, they built habits that supported their goals. And in the next part of this audiobook, we will explore one of the most powerful forces behind long-term success, the quiet but unstoppable power of daily habits. Because while motivation may inspire you to begin, it is discipline that determines how far you ultimately go.
The habit system behind consistent success. If you study the lives of highly successful people long enough, you eventually discover something surprising. Their success rarely comes from one dramatic moment. It rarely comes from a single brilliant decision, and it almost never comes from sudden inspiration. Instead, success is usually the result of something much quieter, something less exciting, something that most people completely overlook. Habits. Small daily habits that quietly shape the direction of a person's life. When Frank Bettger began improving his career, he first believed that success in selling depended mainly on talent. Perhaps some people simply had the natural ability to persuade others. Perhaps some personalities were simply better suited for business. But after observing the most successful sales professionals around him, Bettger noticed something far more important. They all had systems, daily systems. They followed routines that guided how they spent their time, how they interacted with people, and how they improved their skills. And those routines created results, not instantly, but consistently. One of the most dangerous mistakes people make is underestimating the power of small daily actions. A single day rarely changes your life, but 1,000 days of the same habits certainly will. Consider this simple idea. Imagine two people beginning their careers at the same time. Both have similar intelligence, similar opportunities, similar resources. But one of them develops a habit of improving just 1% every day, reading a little more, listening carefully during conversations, learning from mistakes, practicing communication skills, studying people.
The other person simply repeats the same patterns every day without reflection, without learning, without growth. At first, the difference between them is almost invisible. Weeks pass, months pass, and it may seem like nothing significant is happening. But over time, a powerful transformation begins to take place, because improvement compounds. Just like money invested over time grows through compound interest, personal growth follows a similar principle. Each new skill builds upon the previous one. Each lesson makes the next lesson easier to understand. Each experience increases awareness, and slowly the gap between these two individuals becomes enormous. This is the quiet mathematics of personal development. Frank Bettger realized that if he wanted to succeed, he needed to build habits that supported his growth. One of the first habits he developed was preparation. Before meeting a client, Bettger made it a rule to learn as much as possible about the person he was about to speak with, what business they were in, what challenges they might face, what goals they might have. This preparation allowed him to enter conversations with genuine curiosity rather than empty sales pressure, and people respond very differently when they feel understood. Most people approach conversations thinking about what they want to say, but Bettger learned to approach conversations thinking about what he wanted to learn. This subtle shift changed everything. Another habit Bettger developed was keeping detailed records of his work. After each meeting or interaction, he would write notes. What went well? What didn't work? What questions the client asked? What concerns appeared? Over time, these notes became an invaluable source of knowledge. Patterns began to appear. Common objections, common interests, common mistakes. And with this awareness, Bettger could continuously refine his approach. Many people repeat the same mistakes for years simply because they never take the time to reflect. But reflection transforms experience into wisdom. Without reflection, experience becomes repetition, and repetition without learning leads nowhere. Bettger also discovered another powerful habit: follow-up. In business, as in life, most opportunities are lost not because people say no, but because no one follows up. People are busy, decisions take time, circumstances change, but many salespeople would speak to a client once and then disappear. Bettger did something different. He stayed in contact, not aggressively, not annoyingly, but consistently. He would send information, he would check in, he would continue building the relationship. And often, months later, those relationships would become successful opportunities, because trust grows over time, and trust is one of the most valuable assets in any profession. There is another deeper lesson hidden in Bettger's habits. Success is not only about what you do, it is also about what you continue doing when motivation disappears. Motivation is powerful, but it is temporary. Everyone feels inspired at the beginning of a new goal. The real test arrives weeks later, when progress feels slow, when results are uncertain, when effort feels repetitive. This is where habits become essential. A well-built habit removes the need for constant motivation. You simply continue because the behavior has become part of your identity. You read because you are a reader. You practice because you are a learner. You improve because growth has become normal. This is why discipline often appears effortless in highly successful individuals. From the outside, their consistency seems impressive, but internally, they are simply following routines they have practiced for years. Their habits carry them forward even when emotions fluctuate. Frank Bettger eventually realized something profound. Success is rarely dramatic. It is usually the quiet accumulation of disciplined days, small improvements repeated consistently, lessons learned slowly, relationships built patiently, and over time, these small actions create extraordinary results. The tragedy is that many people search for shortcuts. They want instant transformation, instant success, quick breakthroughs, but real growth rarely works that way. The most reliable path to success is almost always the simplest one. Improve a little every day, Learn from every experience, build habits that support your goals, and remain patient with the process. Because while dramatic success stories may capture attention, sustainable success is almost always built quietly, day by day, habit by habit. And Frank Bettger's journey from failure to extraordinary achievement was not the result of luck, it was the result of consistent daily improvement. But as his career progressed, Bettger began discovering another powerful truth. Success in business and in life is not just about discipline or knowledge, it is about people. Understanding people, listening to people, and genuinely connecting with them. And in the next part of this audiobook, we will explore one of the most powerful skills Bettger ever developed, a skill that many people completely underestimate, the extraordinary power of listening. Because the person who learns how to truly listen often gains access to opportunities that others never even notice.
The secret power of listening. There is a simple skill that quietly separates average communicators from extraordinary ones. It is not a complex technique. It does not require advanced education, and yet very few people truly master it. That skill is listening. Not the kind of listening where you wait for your turn to speak, not the kind where your mind is already preparing the next argument, but real listening, focused listening, the kind that makes another person feel completely understood. When Frank Bettger first entered the world of sales, he believed success depended on talking clearly, talking persuasively, talking confidently. Like many beginners, he thought the best salesperson must also be the best speaker. But experience quickly taught him something surprising. The most successful people he observed were not the ones talking the most. They were the ones listening the most. This realization slowly reshaped Bettger's entire approach, because he began noticing something important about human nature. Every person carries an invisible desire, the desire to be heard, to be understood, to feel that their thoughts and concerns actually matter. When someone truly listens to you, something powerful happens psychologically. Your defenses lower, your trust increases, and the conversation becomes cooperative rather than confrontational. This principle is not limited to sales. It applies to leadership, to friendships, to business negotiations, to relationships of every kind. People rarely resist ideas from those who genuinely listen to them, but they often resist ideas from those who only want to speak. Bettger began experimenting with this principle. Instead of focusing on delivering impressive presentations, he began focusing on asking thoughtful questions, questions that encouraged people to speak about themselves, their goals, their problems, their frustrations, their ambitions. And suddenly, Bettger found himself understanding situations far more clearly than before. Because when you truly listen, people often reveal exactly what they need. The challenge is that listening requires patience, and patience can feel uncomfortable in a world that rewards quick responses. Many people interrupt. Many people rush conversations. Many people assume they already know what the other person is about to say. But great communicators do something different. They slow down. They observe. They allow silence to exist in a conversation. And silence can be incredibly powerful, because silence invites honesty. When someone finishes speaking and you pause for a moment before responding, something interesting often happens. The other person continues. They reveal deeper thoughts, more honest opinions, more meaningful details. But if you interrupt too quickly, those deeper insights never appear. Bettger discovered another powerful advantage of listening. Listening gives you time to think. When you talk constantly, your brain is busy producing words. But when you listen, your brain has the opportunity to analyze what is being said. You can detect patterns, you can notice emotions, you can understand motivations, and this awareness allows you to respond intelligently rather than react impulsively.
Many misunderstandings in business and relationships occur simply because people are not truly listening. They hear the words, but they miss the meaning. For example, imagine someone saying, "I'm not sure this is the right time." The surface meaning appears simple, but what might be hidden underneath? Perhaps they are worried about financial risk. Perhaps they lack trust. Perhaps they need more information. Perhaps they simply need reassurance. Without listening carefully, you might assume the conversation is over, but a thoughtful listener might ask a simple follow-up question. What concerns you most about the timing? And suddenly, the real conversation begins. This is the power of curiosity. Curiosity transforms conversations. Instead of trying to win discussions, curious people try to understand them, and understanding often leads to solutions. Frank Bettger eventually became known for this ability. People felt comfortable speaking with him. They felt respected. They felt understood. And as a result, they trusted him. Trust is one of the most valuable currencies in human interaction. Once trust is established, cooperation becomes natural. But trust cannot be forced. It grows slowly through consistent behavior. Listening is one of the fastest ways to build that trust, because listening communicates respect. It signals that the other person's perspective matters, and when people feel respected, they become far more open to collaboration. There's also a deeper psychological principle behind effective listening. When people explain their own thoughts out loud, they often clarify their own decisions. Sometimes a person begins a conversation feeling uncertain, but as they describe their situation, their own reasoning becomes clearer. In this sense, the listener becomes a guide, not by controlling the conversation, but by creating space for the other person to think. Bettger used this approach frequently. Instead of forcing conclusions, he guided discussions through thoughtful questions, and often clients would arrive at decisions themselves. This approach is far more powerful than pressure, because people rarely resist decisions they feel they have made themselves. The irony is that many people believe influence comes from speaking more effectively, but influence often comes from listening more effectively. When you listen carefully, you learn what truly matters to the other person. You learn what motivates them. You learn what worries them. And with this understanding, your words become far more meaningful. Another benefit of listening is something that few people consider. Listening makes you more memorable. Think about the people you most enjoy speaking with. They are often not the loudest individuals in the room. They are the ones who make you feel interesting, the ones who ask thoughtful questions, the ones who remember details about your life. These people leave a lasting impression because they make others feel valued. Frank Bettger realized that becoming a great listener was not just a communication skill, it was a relationship skill, a leadership skill, a life skill. And as he continued applying this principle, his professional success expanded dramatically. But perhaps the most important lesson Bettger learned about listening was this: listening is an act of humility. It requires acknowledging that you do not already know everything. It requires genuine curiosity about other perspectives, and humility often opens doors that confidence alone cannot. As Bettger's career progressed, he began mastering another powerful skill connected to listening: the art of asking the right questions. Because while listening creates understanding, questions create direction. And in the next part of this audiobook, we will explore one of the most powerful communication tools ever developed: the strategic use of questions, a skill that can transform ordinary conversations into powerful opportunities for connection, influence, and success. Because the quality of your questions often determines the quality of your results.
The psychology of questions that open doors. There is a subtle but incredibly powerful tool in human communication, a tool so simple that most people underestimate it. Yet when used correctly, it can transform ordinary conversations into meaningful connections. That tool is the power of asking the right questions. Frank Bettger discovered this principle gradually. At the beginning of his career, he believed his success depended mainly on presenting ideas clearly. He believed he had to explain, persuade, and convince. But over time, he noticed something unusual. The most productive conversations were rarely the ones where he talked the most. Instead, they were the conversations where the other person talked the most. This observation led Bettger to an important realization. People trust conclusions they reach themselves far more than conclusions forced upon them. And one of the most effective ways to guide someone toward their own conclusion is through thoughtful questions. Questions do something remarkable in the human mind. They activate thinking. When someone hears a statement, their brain may react defensively. But when someone hears a question, their brain naturally begins searching for an answer. In other words, questions invite participation rather than resistance. Consider a simple example. Imagine someone telling you, you should change the way you run your business. Even if the suggestion is valuable, your immediate reaction might be defensive. But imagine someone asking instead, what do you think could improve your business the most over the next year? Now the conversation feels completely different. Instead of defending yourself, you begin reflecting. Instead of resisting, you begin exploring possibilities. This is the quiet influence of questions. They shift the conversation from pressure to discovery. Frank Bettger began using this principle deliberately. Instead of approaching clients with long explanations, he approached them with curiosity. He asked questions about their work, their goals, their challenges, their concerns about the future. At first, these conversations felt simple, but something important began happening. Clients started revealing valuable insights about their own needs, problems they had not fully expressed before, opportunities they had not yet considered. And once those insights appeared, meaningful discussions naturally followed. Bettger realized that questions do more than gather information. They create engagement. When people participate in a conversation, they become emotionally invested in it. And emotional investment often leads to deeper trust. But not all questions are equally effective. Some questions close conversations. Others open them. Closed questions usually invite short answers. Questions like, did you like the proposal? Is this a good time? These questions often lead to simple responses. Yes, no, maybe. But open questions encourage reflection. They invite explanation. Questions like, what part of this idea interests you most? What concerns do you still have? How do you usually approach decisions like this? These questions open doors to meaningful dialogue. Another powerful type of question Bettger used was the reflective question. A reflective question shows that you have truly listened to what the other person said. For example, if someone says, I'm worried about making the wrong decision, a reflective question might be, what part of the decision feels most uncertain to you? This type of response does two important things. First, it demonstrates that you are paying attention. Second, it invites the person to explore their own thinking more deeply. Often, when people explain their concerns aloud, they begin solving their own problems. This is one of the hidden powers of thoughtful conversation. The right question at the right moment can unlock clarity that no lecture could achieve. Bettger also learned another important lesson about questions. Timing matters. Asking too many questions too quickly can feel like an interrogation, but asking thoughtful questions at the right moment can feel natural and supportive. The goal is not to control the conversation. The goal is to guide it gently. Curiosity should feel genuine because people can easily sense when questions are manipulative rather than sincere. True curiosity creates connection, and connection creates trust. Over time, Bettger's ability to ask insightful questions became one of his greatest strengths.
Clients felt comfortable sharing their ideas with him. Conversations felt collaborative rather than transactional. And this atmosphere of cooperation led to remarkable success. But there is another reason why questions are so powerful. They help us challenge our own assumptions. Every person sees the world through their own experiences, their own beliefs, their own habits of thinking. Without questions, those mental patterns remain invisible. But questions allow us to explore different perspectives. For example, asking yourself questions like, what could I learn from this situation? What opportunity might be hidden in this challenge? How would a more experienced person approach this problem? These questions expand awareness, they encourage growth, and they transform problems into learning experiences. In this way, questions are not only tools for influencing others, they are tools for improving ourselves. Frank Bettger used this habit constantly. After each meeting, he would ask himself questions. What worked well? What could be improved? What did the client truly care about? These reflections helped him improve rapidly, because every experience became a lesson, and every lesson made the next conversation more effective. The truth is, life often gives better answers to people who ask better questions. Questions shape the direction of our thinking. They determine where our attention goes, and attention determines growth. If you constantly ask yourself questions about problems, you may feel overwhelmed. But if you ask yourself questions about solutions, your mind begins searching for possibilities. This is one of the most powerful mental habits anyone can develop. As Bettger continued refining his approach, he discovered yet another important truth. Even the best conversations sometimes lead to rejection. Sometimes people say no. Sometimes opportunities disappear. And sometimes effort does not produce immediate results. But Bettger eventually learned that rejection itself could become one of the most valuable teachers. In the next part of this audiobook, we will explore how successful individuals transform rejection into motivation. Because the difference between those who eventually succeed and those who give up often comes down to one simple ability: the ability to learn from failure rather than fear it. And once you understand how to reinterpret rejection, you may begin seeing every setback as a step forward rather than a step back.
Rejection is one of the most powerful emotional experiences a person can face. Few things test our confidence more than hearing the word no. In business, in relationships, in opportunities, rejection often feels deeply personal. It can make us question our abilities. It can make us doubt our potential. And sometimes it can make us stop trying altogether. But for Frank Bettger, rejection eventually became something very different. Instead of seeing rejection as proof of failure, he began seeing it as a form of information, a signal, a lesson, a step forward. But this understanding did not appear instantly. Like many people entering a competitive profession, Bettger initially struggled with discouragement. When conversations ended with rejection, it felt like a judgment of his abilities. Each refusal felt like evidence that he was not good enough. And if he had allowed that interpretation to continue, his career might have ended before it truly began. But something interesting happened over time. Bettger began noticing a pattern. Rejection was not random. There were reasons behind it. Sometimes people rejected an idea because they lacked information. Sometimes they rejected it because they were uncertain. Sometimes they rejected it because the timing was wrong. And sometimes they rejected it simply because they were not ready. This realization slowly changed Bettger's perspective. Rejection was not always a final answer. Often, it was simply a stage in the decision-making process. And once he understood this, rejection lost much of its emotional power. Instead of asking himself, "Why did they reject me?" he began asking a much more productive question: "What can I learn from this experience?"
This shift in thinking transformed rejection from an emotional obstacle into a practical teacher. Every unsuccessful conversation became an opportunity to improve. What questions could he ask differently? What information could he explain more clearly? What concerns had he failed to notice? These reflections allowed Bettger to continually refine his approach, and slowly rejection began decreasing. But even more importantly, his resilience began increasing. Resilience is one of the most valuable qualities any person can develop, because success in almost every field involves encountering obstacles. Entrepreneurs face failed ventures. Writers receive rejected manuscripts. Athletes experience defeat. Scientists encounter experiments that do not work. The path toward mastery almost always includes moments of disappointment. But what separates those who eventually succeed from those who stop trying is not talent. It is interpretation. How we interpret failure determines whether it becomes a barrier or a stepping stone. If rejection is interpreted as personal failure, motivation disappears. But if rejection is interpreted as feedback, improvement becomes possible. Frank Bettger began treating every rejection as a small piece of valuable data. Instead of becoming discouraged, he became curious. Why did this conversation not lead to success? What could be adjusted next time? And curiosity is a powerful antidote to discouragement, because curiosity shifts attention away from emotion and toward learning. Another important realization Bettger had was this: rejection is often far less personal than it feels. In business, people make decisions based on many factors that have nothing to do with you. Budgets change, priorities shift, circumstances evolve. Sometimes the answer is simply not the right one at that moment. But people often internalize rejection as a reflection of their own worth. This misunderstanding can prevent talented individuals from reaching their potential. When Bettger stopped interpreting rejection personally, he gained a powerful advantage. He could continue conversations with confidence rather than hesitation. And confidence often changes the entire tone of a discussion. There's also a deeper psychological element to rejection. Human beings naturally seek approval. From childhood, we learn to value acceptance and avoid criticism. But in professional environments, this instinct can become a limitation, because meaningful opportunities often require stepping into situations where rejection is possible. Public speaking, negotiating, proposing ideas, launching new projects. All of these activities involve risk, the possibility that others may disagree. But those who achieve extraordinary results eventually develop a new relationship with rejection. They begin seeing it not as something to fear, but as something to expect. Every successful individual accumulates a history of failed attempts, but those attempts become the foundation for future success. Frank Bettger often emphasized that each rejection brought him closer to the next opportunity, because every conversation improved his skills, every challenge increased his awareness, and every lesson strengthened his determination. Imagine a person who attempts something difficult once and then stops after the first failure. Their growth ends immediately. Now imagine another person who treats every failure as a training experience. Their improvement continues. Over time, the difference between these two individuals becomes enormous. Persistence transforms potential into achievement. But persistence requires the ability to recover emotionally from disappointment. Bettger developed a practical method for maintaining motivation. Whenever he experienced rejection, he reminded himself of a simple truth: every no moves you closer to a yes. In many fields, success is partly a numbers game. Not every conversation will lead to a positive outcome, but every conversation increases experience, and experience increases effectiveness. The person who continues trying naturally improves over time. Another strategy Bettger used was focusing on long-term progress rather than short-term results. A single day might include several rejections, but those moments were only small parts of a much larger journey. When you measure progress across months and years, individual setbacks lose their significance. Perspective changes everything. A temporary disappointment can feel overwhelming when viewed in isolation, but when seen as one step within a long path, it becomes manageable. Eventually, Bettger reached a point where rejection no longer discouraged him. Instead, it energized him, because he understood that every attempt increased the probability of success. And this mindset allowed him to continue moving forward while others stopped trying. But there was another powerful lesson Bettger discovered along the way. Success is rarely achieved alone. Relationships matter. Trust matters. Understanding people matters, and building genuine connections often creates opportunities that effort alone cannot achieve. In the next part of this audiobook, we will explore one of the most important foundations of lasting success, the ability to build trust with others. Because in business and in life, trust is often the bridge between opportunity and achievement. And those who learn to build trust consistently often discover that doors begin opening in ways they never expected.
The psychology of trust. Why people choose to work with you. If you study success in business long enough, one pattern becomes impossible to ignore. People rarely choose to work with someone only because of logic. They rarely make decisions based purely on facts. Instead, something deeper often influences their choices, something emotional, something psychological, something that quietly shapes almost every meaningful decision. That force is trust. Trust is the invisible bridge between opportunity and action. Without trust, even the best ideas struggle to move forward. With trust, even simple ideas can grow into powerful partnerships. When Frank Bettger began his journey in the world of selling, he initially believed success depended on persuasion. He believed the key was presenting strong arguments, explaining benefits clearly, convincing people logically. But experience gradually revealed a different truth. People do not always buy the best offer. They often buy from the person they trust the most. And this realization transformed Bettger's approach to business. Instead of focusing only on selling, he began focusing on relationships. Instead of trying to win arguments, he tried to understand people. And slowly, he discovered that trust is not something that appears instantly. It grows, quietly, through consistent behavior. One of the first lessons Bettger learned about trust was the importance of authenticity. People have an extraordinary ability to sense sincerity. They can often detect when someone is being genuine and when someone is performing a role. If a conversation feels forced, trust becomes difficult to build. But when someone speaks honestly and listens sincerely, the interaction feels natural. And natural conversations create comfortable relationships. Authenticity does not mean perfection. In fact, admitting uncertainty or acknowledging limitations can sometimes increase trust, because honesty signals integrity. When people believe that you are truthful, they become more open to your ideas. Another important factor Bettger discovered was reliability. Trust grows when words and actions match consistently over time. If someone promises something and delivers exactly what they promised, confidence increases. But if promises are broken repeatedly, trust disappears quickly. This principle applies in every area of life, in friendships, in leadership, in professional relationships. Reliability creates stability, and stability creates confidence. Another powerful element in the psychology of trust is empathy. Empathy is the ability to understand another person's perspective, not just intellectually, but emotionally.
When someone feels that you truly understand their concerns, they begin relaxing their defenses. They feel safe expressing their real thoughts, and open communication becomes possible. This is why great communicators often ask thoughtful questions and listen carefully. They are not just gathering information, they are demonstrating respect. Respect is one of the most powerful signals of trustworthiness. When people feel respected, they are far more willing to collaborate. Frank Bettger developed a habit that strengthened this principle. Every time he met someone new, he tried to focus entirely on that person's interests. Instead of thinking about what he wanted to say next, he paid attention to what mattered to them, their work, their goals, their challenges, and this attention made conversations feel meaningful. People felt valued, and when people feel valued, they naturally become more open. Another surprising element of trust is consistency. Trust rarely develops from a single impressive moment. It develops from repeated small interactions. Each positive experience strengthens confidence. Each honest conversation builds familiarity. And over time, familiarity becomes trust. This is why long-term relationships often create the strongest business opportunities, because people prefer working with individuals they already know and understand. But trust also involves something deeper: integrity. Integrity means acting according to principles rather than convenience. It means telling the truth even when the truth is uncomfortable. It means prioritizing long-term respect over short-term advantage. In business, some individuals focus only on immediate results. They push aggressively for quick decisions. They prioritize winning the deal. But Bettger discovered that this approach often damages relationships because pressure creates resistance. Instead, he learned to prioritize the relationship itself. Sometimes that meant advising a client to wait. Sometimes it meant acknowledging that a particular opportunity was not the best fit. And surprisingly, this honesty often strengthened trust dramatically, because people realized that Bettger was not simply trying to sell something, he was trying to help them make the right decision. And once trust reached that level, cooperation became natural. Trust also changes the emotional atmosphere of conversations. Without trust, discussions feel cautious. People protect information. They hesitate to share concerns. They question motives. But with trust, conversations become open. Ideas flow more freely. Problems are discussed honestly, and solutions appear more easily. Another important truth Bettger discovered was that trust multiplies opportunity. When someone trusts you, they often introduce you to others. They recommend you. They share your name in conversations. This quiet network of relationships can become one of the most powerful forces behind success, because opportunities often travel through human connections, not through advertisements, not through cold introductions, but through trust. And trust spreads naturally when people feel confident recommending someone to others. In many ways, trust functions like a form of reputation. Your reputation is the story people tell about you when you are not present, and that story influences how others respond to you before you even meet them. Bettger understood that every interaction contributed to this invisible story. Every conversation, every promise kept, every moment of honesty. These small details slowly shaped how people perceived him, and over time, that reputation created remarkable opportunities. But building trust requires patience. It cannot be rushed. It must be earned. Yet once trust exists, it becomes one of the most valuable assets any person can possess, because trust opens doors that effort alone cannot open. It creates partnerships, it builds communities, it transforms professional interactions into lasting relationships. And Frank Bettger's success eventually became a powerful example of this principle. His reputation for honesty, enthusiasm, and genuine interest in people made him someone others wanted to work with, not because he pressured them, but because they trusted him. and trust, once established, often becomes the foundation of long-term success. But as Bettger continued developing his career, he encountered another challenge that many ambitious people face: managing time, balancing opportunities, maintaining productivity without losing focus. Because even with strong relationships and growing trust, success still requires discipline in how we use our time. And in the next part of this audiobook, we will explore one of the most powerful principles of productivity and personal organization: the ability to focus on the actions that truly create results. Because success often depends not only on how hard we work, but how wisely we direct our effort.
The discipline of focus. Why most people stay busy but not successful. In the modern world, many people live extremely busy lives. Their schedules are full. Their days move quickly. They answer messages, attend meetings, complete tasks, and respond to constant demands. From the outside, it may appear that they're working very hard. Yet despite all this activity, real progress often feels limited. Opportunities seem distant, goals remain unfinished, and success appears slower than expected. Why does this happen? Why do so many hardworking people remain stuck in the same position for years? When Frank Bettger began reflecting on his own career, he noticed something important. Being busy is not the same as being productive. Many activities create motion, but only a few create meaningful results. And learning to recognize the difference between the two became one of the most valuable lessons in Bettger's professional life. Early in his career, Bettger sometimes spent long hours working without clear direction. He answered every request immediately. He handled small tasks that felt urgent. He tried to do everything. But over time, he realized that constant activity was not necessarily bringing him closer to his goals. Some efforts created real opportunities, others simply consumed time. And time is the one resource that can never be replaced. Once a day passes, it is gone forever. This realization forced Bettger to examine how he used each hour of his workday. Which actions actually produced results? Which actions were merely distractions? And gradually he began identifying a powerful principle. A small number of actions usually produce the majority of meaningful outcomes. For example, in sales, conversations with potential clients created far more value than administrative tasks. Learning about people's needs created far more opportunity than organizing paperwork. Building relationships generated far more long-term success than reacting to minor interruptions. Yet many professionals spend most of their day doing the opposite. They focus on what feels urgent rather than what creates progress. They answer messages immediately. They attend unnecessary meetings. They allow interruptions to control their schedule. And by the end of the day, they feel exhausted but not accomplished. Bettger realized that discipline was required to protect the most valuable parts of his time. He began structuring his day around activities that directly contributed to success. This meant prioritizing conversations, prioritizing preparation, prioritizing follow-up with people who were genuinely interested. Everything else became secondary. This shift required courage because sometimes it meant saying no to less important tasks. Many people find this difficult. They want to be helpful, they want to appear cooperative, but without boundaries, time disappears quickly. Successful individuals learn to protect their focus. Focus is the ability to direct your attention toward what truly matters and resist distractions. And in a world full of constant stimulation, focus has become one of the most valuable skills anyone can develop. Consider how often modern life encourages distraction. Notifications, messages, social media, breaking news, endless streams of information competing for attention. Every interruption may feel small, but together they fragment concentration.
When the mind constantly shifts between tasks, deep thinking becomes difficult. And deep thinking is where meaningful solutions often emerge. Frank Bettger eventually adopted a simple but powerful habit. When he began an important task, he committed to finishing it without unnecessary interruptions. This discipline allowed him to enter a state of focused work. In this state, productivity increases dramatically. Ideas become clearer, communication becomes sharper, progress accelerates. Another important lesson Bettger learned was the importance of planning. Each morning, before beginning his work, he would review his priorities. What actions today would move him closest to his long-term goals? Which conversations were most important? Which opportunities required attention? By answering these questions early, he created a clear direction for the day. Without a plan, it is easy for the day to become reactive. You simply respond to whatever appears first. But reactive work rarely leads to meaningful achievement. Intentional work does. Planning transforms time into a tool rather than a limitation. It allows you to invest energy where it matters most. Another critical element of focus is eliminating unnecessary complexity. Many people try to manage too many goals simultaneously. They pursue multiple ambitions at once. They divide their energy across too many directions, and as a result, progress in each area becomes slow. Bettger learned to concentrate on fewer objectives, but pursue them with greater commitment. This approach increased efficiency dramatically because focused effort compounds quickly. Imagine directing sunlight through a magnifying glass. When the light is scattered, it produces warmth. But when it is concentrated into a single point, it becomes powerful enough to ignite fire. Human attention works in a similar way. Scattered attention produces limited results. Concentrated attention produces extraordinary results. Over time, Bettger noticed another advantage of focus. Confidence increases when progress becomes visible. Each completed task builds momentum. Each successful conversation strengthens motivation. Momentum is a powerful force in achievement. Once progress begins, continuing becomes easier. But starting often requires discipline, because the early stages of effort may not produce immediate rewards. This is where many people lose focus. They switch directions too quickly. They abandon projects before results appear. But persistence allows effort to accumulate, and accumulated effort eventually creates breakthroughs. Another valuable strategy Bettger practiced was reviewing his progress regularly. At the end of each week, he reflected on what he had accomplished. What activities created the most value? What distractions consumed unnecessary time? This reflection allowed him to adjust his approach continuously, and improvement became a constant process. The ability to evaluate your own work honestly is one of the fastest ways to accelerate growth, because awareness leads to adjustment, and adjustment leads to progress. Over time, Bettger's disciplined approach to focus transformed the efficiency of his work. He achieved more in fewer hours. He developed stronger relationships, and he experienced greater clarity about where his career was heading. But perhaps the most important lesson he discovered was this: success is rarely determined by how many hours you work. It is determined by how effectively you use the hours you have. Two people may work the same amount of time, but the one who directs that time toward meaningful actions will always move forward faster. Focus turns effort into impact, and impact creates success. Yet as Bettger continued growing professionally, he discovered another principle that shaped his results even more powerfully: the importance of continuous learning. Because no matter how skilled a person becomes, there is always another level of mastery waiting to be explored. And those who commit themselves to lifelong learning often discover that their potential expands far beyond what they once imagined.
The power of continuous improvement. If there is one principle that quietly shapes the lives of highly successful people, it is this:
They never stop learning. No matter how much experience they gain, no matter how many achievements they accumulate, they continue searching for ways to improve. Not dramatically, not overnight, but gradually, consistently, day after day. When Frank Bettger first entered the professional world, he did not consider himself extraordinary. He did not believe he possessed exceptional talent. In fact, much of his early career was defined by uncertainty. But what Bettger eventually discovered was that long-term success rarely belongs to the most naturally gifted individuals. Instead, it often belongs to those who commit themselves to constant growth. Growth through learning, growth through observation, growth through experience. At the beginning of his journey, Bettger treated every interaction as an opportunity to learn. Every meeting with a client became a lesson. Every successful conversation revealed patterns. Every unsuccessful conversation revealed opportunities for improvement. Instead of avoiding mistakes, he studied them. He asked himself questions after each encounter. What worked well? What could have been explained more clearly? What signals had he overlooked? This habit of reflection transformed ordinary experiences into powerful learning tools. Because experience alone does not guarantee growth. Two people may live through the same situation, yet only one of them learns from it. The difference is awareness. Awareness turns events into education. And Bettger became increasingly aware of the details shaping his professional interactions. He paid attention to tone of voice, body language, timing, the kinds of questions that encouraged people to speak openly, the types of explanations that created clarity. Slowly, these observations accumulated into practical wisdom. Another important element of Bettger's growth was curiosity. Curiosity is a powerful engine for learning. When a person remains curious, every situation becomes interesting, every conversation becomes an opportunity, and every challenge becomes a puzzle waiting to be understood. But curiosity requires humility. It requires admitting that there is always more to learn. Some individuals reach a certain level of success and begin believing they already understand everything. At that moment, their growth often slows dramatically, because confidence without curiosity eventually becomes stagnation. Bettger avoided this trap by maintaining the mindset of a student. Even as his career advanced, he continued studying the behavior of successful individuals. He observed how experienced professionals approached conversations, how they built relationships, how they responded to objections, and each observation added another piece to his growing understanding. Another powerful habit Bettger developed was reading. Books became one of his most valuable sources of knowledge. Through reading, he gained access to ideas, strategies, and experiences far beyond his own personal life. This is one of the extraordinary advantages of learning from others. Instead of discovering every lesson through trial and error, you can benefit from the experiences of those who have already traveled the path before you. A single book can contain decades of wisdom. A single idea can change the direction of a career. And Bettger recognized that investing time in learning was one of the most valuable investments he could make. But learning alone is not enough. Knowledge must be applied. Many people read valuable ideas yet never translate them into action. Information becomes useful only when it influences behavior. Bettger made it a habit to test new ideas immediately. If he discovered an interesting communication strategy, he would try it in his next conversation. If he learned a new method of preparation, he would implement it the next day. This cycle of learning and application accelerated his development. Each new concept became a real-world experiment. Some ideas worked well, others required adjustment, but every experiment increased his understanding, and this constant experimentation transformed learning into progress. Over time, Bettger noticed another interesting pattern. Small improvements accumulated in powerful ways. A slightly better question, a clearer explanation, a more thoughtful follow-up. Each improvement seemed minor in isolation, but when combined, they dramatically increased effectiveness. This is the quiet power of continuous improvement. Tiny adjustments repeated consistently can produce extraordinary long-term results. Many people search for dramatic breakthroughs. They hope for a single moment that will suddenly change everything. But real transformation often occurs through gradual evolution. Like a river slowly shaping a landscape, consistent effort reshapes abilities over time. Another insight Bettger discovered was that learning extends beyond professional skills. Personal development plays an equally important role. Understanding human psychology, managing emotions, developing discipline. These qualities influence success just as much as technical knowledge. For example, emotional control can determine how a person responds to rejection. Discipline can determine whether someone maintains productive habits. Self-awareness can determine how effectively someone communicates with others. In many ways, personal growth becomes the foundation for professional achievement. Bettger understood that improving himself internally allowed him to perform externally. As his awareness expanded, he also began sharing his experiences with others. Teaching became another powerful method of learning. When you explain an idea to someone else, you clarify your own understanding. Teaching forces you to organize knowledge, to express it clearly, to examine it critically, and often teaching reveals new insights you had not noticed before. This process deepened Bettger's mastery of the principles that had transformed his career. But perhaps the most important aspect of continuous improvement is patience. Growth rarely appears instantly. Skills develop gradually. Understanding deepens slowly, and the results of learning often appear long after the effort has begun. Many people abandon the learning process too early. They become discouraged when progress seems invisible. But those who persist eventually experience a powerful moment, a moment when accumulated knowledge suddenly begins producing remarkable results. Opportunities become easier to recognize. Conversations become more effective. Decisions become clearer. And the person who once struggled begins performing with confidence. Frank Bettger's journey from failure to success was not the result of a single dramatic breakthrough. It was the result of continuous improvement, learning, testing, reflecting, adjusting, and repeating this process again and again. This simple system of growth allowed him to transform ordinary abilities into extraordinary results. But as Bettger's experience expanded, he discovered another truth about success. Knowledge and discipline are powerful, but the way a person thinks about themselves may be even more powerful, because the beliefs we hold about our own potential quietly influence every decision we make. In the next part of this audiobook, we will explore the psychology of belief, how your internal story shapes your external results, and why changing the way you think about your own capabilities may be the most important transformation of all.
The psychology of belief, how your mindset shapes your success. Long before success becomes visible in the external world, it usually begins as a quiet shift inside the mind, a shift in belief, a shift in the way a person sees their own potential. Because the story we tell ourselves about who we are quietly influences every decision we make, every risk we take, every opportunity we pursue, and every challenge we face. For much of his early life, Frank Bettger struggled with self-doubt. Like many people who experience early failures, he questioned whether he truly possessed the ability to succeed. Each setback seemed to confirm an uncomfortable idea. Perhaps he simply was not talented enough. Perhaps success belonged to other people, people who were more confident, more charismatic, more naturally gifted. But as Bettger gained experience, he began noticing something remarkable. Many individuals who achieved extraordinary results did not begin with extraordinary confidence. In fact, some of them began with very ordinary abilities. What separated them from others was not perfection. It was belief, not blind optimism, but a quiet conviction that improvement was possible, that effort could produce progress, that failure did not define the future. This belief changed the way they approached challenges. When someone believes improvement is possible, they continue trying, they experiment, they learn, they persist through moments of uncertainty. But when someone believes success is beyond their reach, they often stop trying before their real potential appears. In this way, belief becomes a powerful filter shaping our behavior. Two individuals may face the same opportunity. One person sees possibility, the other sees risk. One person sees a chance to grow, the other sees a chance to fail. And these interpretations influence the actions that follow. Over time, Bettger began deliberately strengthening his own belief in progress, not through empty motivation, but through evidence. Each small improvement became proof that growth was possible. Each successful interaction became confirmation that skills could develop. This approach created a cycle of increasing confidence. Success reinforced belief. Belief encouraged more action. Action created more success. Psychologists often describe this as a self-reinforcing pattern. Our expectations influence our behavior influences our results, and our results strengthen our expectations. This cycle can work in both directions. Negative beliefs can produce hesitation, which leads to missed opportunities. Missed opportunities reinforce the belief that success is unlikely. But positive beliefs can produce initiative, which creates opportunities, and opportunities reinforce confidence. Understanding this cycle helped Bettger transform the way he viewed challenges. Instead of asking, "What if I fail?" he began asking a more empowering question, "What might I learn?" This simple change redirected his attention from fear toward growth. And when fear loses its control over decision-making, new possibilities appear. Another powerful element of belief is identity. Identity refers to the way we define ourselves. For example, a person might think of themselves as someone who struggles with communication, or someone who avoids risk, or someone who lacks leadership ability. These internal labels may feel harmless, but they quietly shape behavior. If you believe you are not good at something, you are less likely to practice it, less likely to experiment, less likely to improve. But when identity changes, behavior changes as well. Bettger gradually began seeing himself differently. Instead of identifying as someone who had failed in the past, he began identifying as someone who was learning and improving. This shift allowed him to approach challenges with curiosity rather than fear, because learning does not require perfection. Learning requires participation, and participation creates experience. Over time, experience builds competence, and competence strengthens belief. Another important aspect of belief is imagination. Human beings possess the extraordinary ability to imagine future possibilities. We can visualize achievements before they occur. We can mentally rehearse success. Athletes often use this technique. Before performing, they imagine the movements they will execute, the outcomes they want to achieve. This mental rehearsal prepares the mind for action. Bettger used a similar approach. Before important conversations, he would imagine the interaction going well. He would imagine speaking confidently, listening carefully, responding thoughtfully. This mental preparation reduced anxiety and increased clarity, because the mind often performs better when it has already rehearsed the situation internally. Belief also influences resilience. When someone strongly believes that progress is possible, setbacks become temporary obstacles rather than permanent failures. They recover faster. They continue experimenting. They maintain momentum even during difficult periods. Without belief, effort fades quickly, but with belief, persistence becomes natural. Over time, Bettger realized that belief must be supported by action. Positive thinking alone cannot create success, but belief can create the motivation required to take meaningful action, and meaningful action is what ultimately produces results. This balance between mindset and effort became one of Bettger's most important lessons. Confidence grows from experience grows from action, and action becomes easier when belief is strong. Perhaps the most empowering realization Bettger reached was this: our past does not permanently define our future. Skills can be learned, habits can be changed, confidence can be built. The mind is far more adaptable than many people realize. Individuals who once struggled with communication can become excellent speakers. People who once avoided risk can become courageous leaders. Those who once doubted themselves can develop extraordinary determination. But these transformations begin with a simple decision, the decision to believe that change is possible. And once that belief takes root, the path toward growth becomes much clearer. As Bettger's journey continued, this mindset became one of the most powerful forces shaping his achievements, because the greatest limitation many people face is not a lack of opportunity, it is a lack of belief in their own potential. When belief expands, effort increases. When effort increases, skill develops. And when skill develops, success becomes increasingly likely. This understanding eventually formed the foundation of Bettger's philosophy. Success is not reserved for a special group of people. It is available to those who commit themselves to learning, persistence, and belief in progress. And in the final part of this audiobook, we will bring together the key lessons from Bettger's journey, the principles that transformed his life from failure to success, and the practical ideas that anyone can apply to create meaningful progress in their own career and personal development. Because when discipline, learning, relationships, and belief come together, extraordinary change becomes possible. The final lesson From failure to a life of success. When we look back at the journey of Frank Bettger, it is easy to focus on the success he eventually achieved, the recognition, the financial rewards, the reputation he built. But the most important part of his story is not the success itself. It is the transformation. Because Bettger did not begin his career as an obvious success story. In fact, he began with failure, uncertainty, and moments when it seemed easier to give up than to continue. Yet those early experiences became the foundation for everything that followed. They forced him to question his habits, to study his behavior, to observe the people who were achieving the results he wanted, and most importantly, they forced him to grow. The lessons Bettger discovered throughout his journey may appear simple at first, but their simplicity is exactly what makes them powerful. Success rarely requires complicated strategies. More often, it requires consistent application of fundamental principles that anyone can practice. One of the first lessons Bettger learned was the power of enthusiasm. Energy changes the way people respond to you. When you approach conversations with genuine interest and enthusiasm, you create a positive emotional atmosphere. People are naturally drawn to energy, and that energy often opens doors that hesitation keeps closed. Another important lesson was the power of listening. Most people want to speak. Few people truly listen. But those who learn to listen carefully gain access to valuable insights. They understand what others need, what they fear, what they hope for. And this understanding creates stronger relationships that often become the foundation for opportunity. Bettger also discovered the importance of asking thoughtful questions. Questions encourage reflection. They guide conversations. They transform discussions from arguments into collaborations. The person who asks the right questions often gains deeper understanding than the person who simply talks the most. Then came the lesson of resilience. Rejection is unavoidable in any meaningful pursuit. No idea receives universal acceptance. No opportunity arrives without risk. But Bettger learned that rejection does not define failure. It simply provides information that can be used to improve. Those who persist eventually gain experience that others never acquire, and experience becomes a powerful advantage. Another critical principle was focus. Not every activity creates progress. Some tasks simply create motion without producing results. Learning to direct attention toward meaningful actions transforms productivity. Because success rarely requires doing more things. It requires doing the right things consistently. Continuous improvement became another cornerstone of Bettger's philosophy. Every conversation provided a lesson. Every experience offered feedback. And small improvements accumulated over time. This steady evolution allowed ordinary abilities to become extraordinary strengths. But perhaps the most powerful transformation occurred within Bettger's mindset. He began his journey with doubts about his own potential. Yet through learning, discipline, and persistence, those doubts gradually changed. Belief replaced hesitation. Confidence replaced uncertainty. And once his internal perspective shifted, his external results began changing as well. This is one of the most important lessons in personal development. Your future is not limited by your past. Skills can be learned. Habits can be improved. Confidence can be built. The human mind is remarkably adaptable. Growth becomes possible the moment we accept responsibility for our own development. Of course, transformation rarely happens instantly. It requires patience. The habits that create success must be practiced repeatedly, day after day, week after week. But consistency has a powerful effect. Small efforts accumulate. Knowledge expands. Confidence grows. And gradually, the person you are becoming begins achieving results that once seemed impossible. Frank Bettger's story reminds us that success is rarely the result of extraordinary talent alone. More often, it is the result of ordinary actions repeated with extraordinary consistency. Enthusiasm, listening, learning, persistence, focus, belief. These principles may appear simple, but when practiced consistently, they transform lives. And perhaps the most encouraging part of Bettger's story is that these principles are available to anyone. They do not depend on background. They do not depend on luck. They depend on decisions. The decision to improve. The decision to keep learning.
The decision to persist even when progress feels slow. Every person listening to this story stands at a similar starting point. Today is simply another day. But the habits you choose today quietly shape the life you will experience tomorrow. The conversations you have, the effort you apply, the knowledge you pursue. These small choices accumulate over time, and eventually they form the story of your life. So the final question is not whether success is possible. The real question is whether you are willing to begin the process of growth. Because transformation rarely begins with a dramatic moment. It begins with a small decision. The decision to improve just a little today, and then to repeat that decision tomorrow, and the day after that, until improvement becomes a habit, until discipline becomes normal, until success becomes the natural result of the life you have built. And that is the quiet secret behind every meaningful achievement. Not sudden brilliance, but steady progress. One day at a time.